The Route 7 bus comes at 6:48 every morning and it is always full by the time it reaches my stop on Clement Street. I know every face on that bus the way you know wallpaper, without really looking. The man in the gray parka who reads the same folded newspaper section all the way downtown. The two women from the textile plant who talk across each other without stopping. The kid with the headphones who falls asleep before the second light. I ride it because my truck needs a new alternator and I haven't gotten around to it. That's the real reason. I tell Nora it's because parking downtown costs $12 a day and she believes me because she's 11 and that sounds like a grown-up reason. The truth is I don't mind the bus. 31 years of reading stress points and load calculations will make 'em uncomfortable with waiting. It was a Tuesday in March when the old woman got on at Millhaven Avenue. She had a canvas bag over one arm and a second one looped at the elbow, and she stood in the aisle trying to get her footing while the bus pulled away from the curb. Nobody moved. I was in the window seat, second row from the back, my county records badge already around my neck. I stood up. She looked at me the way people do when they're surprised, a small hesitation, like she was checking whether I'd made a mistake. "Please," I said. She sat down. Set the bags against her shins. Said thank you in a way that meant it. I stood the rest of the way to the county building, holding the overhead bar, watching the city go gray and then pale gold as the sun came over the Hartfield Square Tower crane. She got off 2 stops after me. I didn't know her name. I didn't think about it again. That morning I filed 14 permit revision packets and ate my lunch at my desk and called Nora at 3:15 to make sure she'd gotten home from school. She'd been working on a science project, load-bearing arches, of all things, and she wanted to know if a wider base always meant more stability. I told her it depended on the material and the load distribution, and she said that made sense and could I look at her foam board model when I got home. I said yes. That was Tuesday. 6 days later I was walking the long way from the bus stop to the county building, a habit I'd picked up in winter when I needed the cold air to wake me up and hadn't shaken in the warmer months. The long way runs past Hartfield Square, where Vane Development had been putting up a 12-story mixed-use building for the better part of 2 years. I'd watched it go up the way a man watches something he knows how to read. Foundation pour first, then the column forms. They had the ground floor poured and were prepping the second-level formwork. I stopped at the chain-link fence and looked. It took me maybe 45 seconds. The lateral shoring frame on the northeast corner had shifted. Not much. 8-10 inches of drift on the vertical brace, and whoever had set it had run the anchor pins into what looked like fill material rather than the structural slab. The pour was scheduled. I could see the pump truck already staged on the street side and the batch plant tickets taped to the trailer door. If they poured on that frame, the whole northeast corner would kick, and that section would be carrying the column load for the second floor transfer beam. 45 seconds. 31 years of reading it. I found the site foreman near the trailer. Big man, hard hat cocked back, coffee thermos in one hand. His name was stitched on his vest, D. Pruitt. "Excuse me," I said. He looked at me the way a man looks when he doesn't have time for what he's about to hear. "I'm sorry to bother you. I used to do structural engineering work and I'm looking at your northeast shoring frame. The lateral brace has drifted on the anchor set. You may be running those pins into fill." He looked at the frame. Looked at me. Took a slow drink of his coffee. "We had an engineer sign off last week," he said. "I understand. I'd just ask that somebody take another look at those anchor points before the pour. We're staging in 2 hours." "I know. That's why I'm saying it now." He looked at me again, at the county records badge, at my jacket, at whatever it is a man's face says when he's 60 years old and standing at a fence with no title to his name. "I'll pass it along," he said. He said it the way a man says he'll pass something along when he has no intention of passing anything along. I gave him my cell number. He wrote it on the back of a batch plant ticket and put it in his vest pocket. I walked to the county building and filed permits until noon. He didn't call. I thought about Nora's foam board model. She had the arch spans right, but she'd placed the keystone slightly off-center and I hadn't told her yet because I wanted to see if she'd find it herself. She would. She had her mother's instinct for when something was sitting wrong. Her mother had been an architect and she'd had a gift for looking at a thing and knowing before she could say why. Nora had the same gift. She just didn't know it yet. I left the county building at 5:15 and walked home the long way again. The pump truck was still staged at Hartfield Square. The pour hadn't started. That was something. I stood at the fence for a while in the late light, and then I went to the corner store for groceries and home to make dinner. Nora showed me the Arch model after we ate. I looked at it a long time. "The Keystone," I said. She looked at it. Looked at me. "It's not centered." "No." "How far off?" "Enough." She pulled it out and reset it without asking me anything else. I didn't sleep well that night. At 5 in the morning I was up. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the image of the shoring frame in my head, the way the brace foot sat, the soil color at the anchor point, the gap in the bottom plate that told you what you were looking at if you've been looking at these things since 1994. I drank the coffee and I thought about what happens when a second-level transfer beam loses its corner support mid-pour. The weight redistributes. The adjacent columns take what they weren't designed to carry. If there's anybody on that deck. I wrote Nora a note. Left it on the counter. Put on my jacket and walked back to Hartfield Square in the dark. The batch plant truck was already there. The pump operator was running checks. A 3-man crew was up on the second-level deck, checking the form panels. The pour was 90 minutes away. I found a piece of chalk in my jacket pocket. I carry chalk the way some men carry a pocket knife, old habits from a life of job sites, and I walked the perimeter of the fence until I found the gap near the northeast corner. I didn't go through it. I crouched at the fence line and I looked at the anchor point one more time in the thin morning light. It was worse than I'd thought. The plate had settled another half-inch overnight. The fill material had compressed under it. I reached through the chain link and drew a chalk line in the gravel along the base of the form, a long mark, the way you mark a fault line for a crew to follow with their eyes. Then I drew an arrow pointing up at the anchor. I stood up. Behind me, a voice said, "What are you doing?" I turned around. She was standing on the sidewalk in a dark coat, a travel mug in one hand and a site plan rolled under her arm. 60s, composed, the kind of face that has been making decisions for a long time. For a moment I didn't place her. Then I did. The canvas bags. The Millhaven Avenue stop. The thank you that had meant it. "You were on the bus," she said. "You were the one who needed the seat," I said. A beat of quiet. "Margaret Vane," she said. I knew the name. Vane Development had been building in Hartfield for 20 years. I said my name and told her what I'd told the foreman, what I was seeing in the shoring frame, the drift, the anchor set, the fill. I told her I'd talked to Pruitt the morning before and given him my number. I told her the pour was 90 minutes out. She looked at the chalk mark. She looked at the frame. She looked at me. Then she took out her phone. "Dale," she said. "Pull the pour." I heard his voice through the phone, a pushback, the 2 hours of staging costs pushback, and she said, "Pull it," again and hung up. She walked to the trailer and called someone else. 15 minutes later a man in a white hard hat arrived with a surveying rod and a tablet and spent 25 minutes at the northeast corner while the pour crew stood around and Dale Pruitt stood near the trailer with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold. The man in the white hard hat walked over to us. "Fill material," he said. "Anchor sets compromised. If you'd poured on that frame you'd have lost the northeast column support on the transfer beam." Pruitt was quiet. Margaret Vane looked at me. "How long were you a structural engineer?" she said. 31 years, I said. "Mostly bridges and mid-rise. I retired early when my wife passed. I do blueprint archiving for the county now." She nodded, as if that made a kind of sense she'd already suspected. "I'd like you to walk the rest of this structure with me," she said. I looked at the site plan under her arm. "Do you have the foundation drawings?" She handed me the roll without hesitating. We were on the site for 3 hours. I found 2 more items, a tension anchor in the west side shoring that needed resetting, and a form panel gap on the north face of the elevator core that would have bled grout and weakened the pour. Neither was as serious as the northeast corner. Both needed attention before any concrete moved. I marked everything with chalk. Wrote the fix specifications in my own handwriting on a yellow legal pad Vane's site manager produced from somewhere. The poor crew watched from a distance. Pruitt watched too, quiet now in a different way than he'd been quiet at the pump truck. At some point he came and stood near me while I was marking the elevator core panel. "You do this a long time," he said. Not defensive now. Just asking. "Long enough," I said. He nodded. Watched me draw the chalk line along the panel seam. "I should have called you," he said. "You had a schedule," I said. "I understand schedules." He didn't say anything else. But he picked up the corner of the panel and held it steady while I finished marking, and neither of us said a word about it, and that was fine. We finished at 9:30 and stood on the sidewalk in the morning light. "I owe you more than a bus seat," Margaret Vane said. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "This is what the chalk is for." She almost smiled. "I want to hire you as a consulting engineer for the remainder of this project. I need someone who will look at this site the way you look at it. Not once a week. Every significant pour." I thought about the county records office. The filing system I'd built over 2 years. The 14 permit revisions. I thought about Nora's arch model with the recentered keystone, sitting on the kitchen table. "My rate is $65 an hour," I said. "I'll need a hard hat authorization card and access to all the structural drawings from the foundation up." "Done," she said. We shook hands on the sidewalk at Hartfield Square, under the tower crane, with the poor crew starting to reset the Northeast form and Dale Pruitt signing off on the work order. That evening I sat with Nora at the kitchen table and told her what had happened, not all of it, but enough. I told her I'd seen something in a building that wasn't right, and I'd said so, and it had mattered. She looked at me across the table with her mother's eyes, that steady, assessing look that could measure a thing before the instruments could. "Was it like the keystone?" she said. "Exactly like the keystone," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "So you fixed it," she said. Not a question. "Helped fix it," I said. "There were other people who did the work." She thought about that. "But you were the one who saw it." "Yes. Mom always said you could see things in structures that other people walked right past." I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, a car went by on Clement Street, and the kitchen light made the foam board arch on the table look almost gold. "She knew what she was looking at," I said finally. Nora nodded and went back to her model, and I watched her hands on the foam board, small and sure, finding the places where things had to sit just right or nothing above them would hold. She'd been at it for a week now and she'd found 3 problems on her own, including the keystone, and she hadn't needed me for any of them except to say that yes, she was right. Some things you see because you've been looking for 30 years. Some things you see because someone taught you to look, and the gift passes down without a word being said about it. I had a hard hat on a peg by the door the next morning. And the morning after that.